A lot of the material in this sale are legal documents, and many of them are contracts or letters related to contracts. And what I think is interesting about this type of material is that it really allows us to look at what the studio system was all about. And a lot has been written and said about the finances of the studio system, and some has been written and said about the aesthetics of the films produced under the studio system. Looking at the contracts, it gives us a different perspective. It allows us to see how the actors and actresses were treated under a studio system. When you look at a contract, most of these contracts are essentially the same. Many of them have standard language in them, and one of the first articles of a studio contract is the length of the term. And sometimes these contracts were for 6-month periods, sometimes 1 year or multiple years, and occasionally they were for specific films or even for a series of films. The next section of most of these contracts, and for many people the most interesting, is the compensation. How much were they paid? And compensation varied greatly, star by star. In some cases, if you were just a beginning actor, you got a very standard deal in which you were paid on a week-to-week basis, a flat amount. For example, Lot 11 in the sale is Rita Hayworth's first studio contract, in which she was paid $200 a week. One of the things that struck me in going through all these contracts and looking at what these stars were paid is that it was very much a system of the haves and the have-nots. Some of these stars were paid enormous sums of money. Others, when you think about it, were really just getting by. One of the ones that struck me right away was Will Rogers. His contracts that we have in the sale were toward the end of his career. Obviously, most of his career was in silent film, and once he began making talkies, his compensation really shot up because he really became to America the biggest star. One of the most impressive contracts is Lot 15, which is his last studio contract, signed just a few months before his tragic death in a plane crash. In the contract, he was paid $1.1 million to do 10 films. There are a couple things about this that are extraordinary. One, that it was for that number of films. Normally, contracts were for 2-3 films, or for a 1 year or 2 year period. This is quite a large number of films. Fox was set on Will Rogers. They wanted him. He was their biggest star. And then obviously the other aspect is $1.1 million in 1935. This was at the height of the Depression. That was an extraordinary sum of money. And even when you break it down on a film-by-film basis, to be paid $110,000 per film made him the highest paid entertainer in America, and really one of the most well-paid people in all of America. To put that in perspective, another major star of the time was Henry Fonda, and in 1939, he was only paid $25,000 per film. In looking at the haves and the have-nots, the other big winners were Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant. And Lot 54, Jimmy Stewart's contract for Call Northside 777, was really interesting because it's the first studio contract in which a star didn't receive a base salary, but instead received a percentage of the gross profits. And this was groundbreaking. It really tied the star to the success of the picture. And while now it's commonplace, back then this was absolutely unheard of. Shortly after Stewart's groundbreaking contract, Cary Grant signed a similar one in which he was paid even more. And that's Lot 63 in the sale. It's his 1950 contract, which paid him a base salary of $290,000. But on top of that, he received 8% of the gross receipts up to $2.5 million, and then 10% after that, uncapped. So there was no limit to how much money he could make. And I suppose there's no surprise here that men were paid more than women. In 1930, Humphrey Bogart signs his first studio contract, which is Lot 1 in the sale, and it paid him $400 a week. Rita Hayworth in 1935, so shortly thereafter, also her first studio contract, was paid $200 a week, exactly half of what Bogart was paid. And finally, even looking at some of the stars that we remember most, Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley, in 1955, when Marilyn gets a contract that she always dreamed of, she's paid $100,000 per film. In 1958, Elvis Presley was paid $200,000 per film. So clearly there was a gender gap going on in Hollywood. Aside from the starlets and the leading men, there are also lots in this sale of literary interest, including documents signed by John Steinbeck, Raymond Chandler, and William Faulkner, in which they were selling the rights to their stories to 20th Century Fox. While I hope this video presentation gave you a sense of what's in the sale. Really, the only way to really appreciate this material is to come see it in person. The exhibition is open to the public, as is the sale itself. We encourage everyone to come in and take a look for themselves what the golden age of Hollywood was really all about.